Hi Bother Brigade, here's what's bothering me today. Like I said in yesterday's video, it basically came down to a tie between covering Madeleine Albright's death and updates to the Freedom Convoy. So as you can tell from yesterday's video, we talked about the dead lady. Now we're going to talk about the updates that have happened over the past few days with regards to the Freedom Convoy, particularly the one in Ottawa, because unfortunately there are still Freedom Convoys that are ongoing, slow roll, like it's still a whole thing. So this isn't really that, it's more like beginning to deal with some of the aftermath of what happened in the nation's capital. So for starters, the cost. Freedom Convoy protests cost City of Ottawa $36.6 million. Yeah, so turns out that whole terribleness cost the City of Ottawa $36.6 million because of like the policing cost of nearly $1 million a day, which again is like, oh my god, but also like different damages, trash cleanup, like legal fees, all this kind of stuff, you know, lost business revenue and stuff like that. So that's the final tally. I would love to know if the fundraising organizers of the Freedom Convoy are going to, you know, help out their fellow Canadians that they love to pretend to care about. But yeah, I'm pretty sure most people in Ottawa are not going to be too happy about having to foot that bill and are going to want to take it out of the proverbial hide of the Freedom Convoy organizers and participants. So maybe that gets added to the civil lawsuit or like a different lawsuit entirely. And we're going to kind of come back to that. But the other thing that needs to be mentioned in terms of like an update is before the Emergencies Act was used, the police were aware that this was a threat to national security. Ottawa Convoy deemed national security threat a week before Emergencies Act. So by like keeping tabs on them, by walking around, just seeing what was going on, looking online, keeping tabs on people, turns out not just the like local Ottawa police, but the Ontario Provincial Police, the OPP, possibly even the RCMP as well, became aware a week before that infamous Emergencies Act was used that this was a threat to national security. So for all the people thinking, oh, this was just like, you know, a fun time. And not to say that I, you know, ever completely trust the police, except crucially when it comes to what they do in terms of supporting the state. Because as I've said before on this channel, that's all the police serve and protect. They serve the interests of the state and they protect the ruling class. That's just it, right? That's the thin blue line in a gross nutshell. So when they say that something was a national security threat, really what it actually means is it's a threat to the ruling class or the established order of things. So that's quite interesting that the Ottawa one took forever to be responded to, and only about a week before it was, you know, declared an emergency, or the Emergencies Act was used rather, they say, oh yeah, this is a threat to national security. We saw that they responded very quickly to the Ambassador Bridge blockade down in Windsor because that was affecting the pocketbook on the daily. So like, okay, we got to deal with that. So this is actually kind of interesting and surprising to me. But it's still worth noting that the Ottawa Convoy was deemed a threat to national security. So I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people, possibly even in the, you know, replies down below, talking about, oh yeah, well, you know, it's such a national security threat, all those bouncy castles. And I mean, we've talked about that before on this channel. Again, see the playlist, just watch all the different videos to see how and why in the various myriad of ways the Freedom Convoy supporters are just 100% objectively wrong about everything. And so, you know, in response to this whole, oh, they're a threat to national security, some people decided to be very clear about, you know, something else that we saw during the protests. Say it with me one more time. Police were complicit in enabling the convoy occupation. 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 And well, that brings us to actually the next update in this saga, which is the rather good bit of news that policing as it currently exists may be under review in the City of Ottawa. Ottawa City Council calls for a new policing model in Canada's capital. Occupation of downtown core sparks conversation about changing current policing plan. I said it before and I'll say it again. The stunning failure of the Ottawa police did more for the defund the police movement than I or just about anyone else has done in the past few years. Ottawa, a city full of liberals, was shocked when they saw that the police weren't actually dealing with this the way they know that police have dealt with other protests before if they've gone too out of hand. Especially if you know they happen to be brown or especially indigenous, am I right? But this is crucial. It's actually, weirdly enough, a bit of good news, where suddenly the actual city council, under pressure from what they've seen and their own constituents, are beginning to explore, and sure, it's not a guarantee or anything, but they are beginning to explore what an alternate form of policing might look like in the city, which in the wake of everything that's happened is actually a pretty bold move forward, if I'm being honest. Plus, as we saw at the top of the video, the price tag might also have something to do with it in terms of, so let me get this straight. We're spending nearly $1 million a day to watch these people take selfies and help the occupiers occupy a huge chunk of our city. What? So what this results in? Well, it's still far too early to tell, but the idea that city council is at least open to some significant changes is definitely a step in the right direction. And well, we're just gonna kind of keep more of the good news going, because there's some updates to, say, charges for some of the ringleaders of the Freedom Convoy. Ottawa protest organizers George Billings and Pat King are now co-accused, facing 10 criminal counts after the Crown brought new charges against them. Both remain in custody. The Crown has also laid new charges jointly against Tamara Litch and Chris Barber, both out on bail. So yeah, even though they're out on bail, there are still new charges that are being applied to Tamara and that Barber guy. The Crown has laid new charges against Ottawa protest organizers Tamara Litch and Chris Barber, now jointly accused of mischief, counseling mischief, intimidation, counseling intimidation, counseling obstruction of police, and obstructing police. And yeah, there's even a CTV News article and even video about this saying Freedom Convoy organizers Litch, Barber facing new charges. So yeah, these people are finally getting some consequences for their actions. And sure, some like Tamara are out on bail, others like Pat King are still in jail. But new charges in the light of increasing gathering of evidence and just kind of wanting to, hopefully anyway, send a message to these absolute terrible people who terrorized downtown Ottawa for a few weeks. So, good things, and they aren't the only ones facing consequences. But here's where it gets a little more complicated or emotionally complex, if you will. Maybe some people saw several images that now, maybe live in infamy of a big rig with a trailer on it that had "Fuck Trudeau" plastered all along both sides of the trailer. Well, there's been an update to the saga of that trailer. Wendell Thorndike. Good morning. After a long, hard thought process, it's become apparent that it's time to sell the old girl and the wagon. I haven't put a price on it yet and won't sell it till it's polished and detailed. My plans for the future have changed considerably. If by chance you're interested, please contact Davy Truck Sales in Cordis. No, I'm not happy about it, but let's hope it goes to a good home. Enjoy your day. No, it isn't being sold because of government issues. It's just time for me to go in a new direction. Ooh, cryptic. But yeah, turns out, right, that several individuals who participated in this convoy, whether they are ringleaders or willing participants who stayed behind even after police and, city councilors, I think Catherine McKenna was the one in Ottawa who's going around saying, hey, if you agree to leave now, you'll be exempt from litigation or something along those lines. I remember it being a thing when that was going on. And so some of these people now who decide to stay are finding out that their actions have consequences. Perhaps their bank accounts got seized, people know who they are, and so now they're being ostracized or shunned in their communities, or now it's no, we can't have you, driving this around, it looks bad on us in the company, and that's why he needs to sell it. We really don't know the reasons, but it's clear that something that was very close and important to him now has to go away, and he also openly admits that he's not happy about it. So, it's his business not to mention what's going on, but clearly it's not something good, right? That brings us to another instance that has been made very famous over the course of the past 48 hours. I regret going. Protester says he spent life savings to support Freedom Convoy. The man on screen is Martin Joseph, and he is living out of his SUV after he was kicked out of the home that he was living in by his landlord because of his, stance on the issue of the Freedom Convoy and some other stuff. So he's living out of his van, and he used up his entire life savings, which I believe was about $15,000, to support the Freedom Convoy. And now he states that he doesn't have an opinion on masks and mandates, but what kind of galvanized him was that when a friend of his was dying in Montreal back in 2020, he wasn't allowed to go see them because of, COVID and restrictions and stuff like that. So he wasn't able to see a dear friend who was dying. And I get it, right? Like, if a close friend of mine, or God forbid, a close family member, grandparents, mother, father, sisters, like cousin, if someone who was close and important to me was dying and I couldn't see them, yeah, that would absolutely piss me the fuck off. I absolutely understand the emotional response and the anger that this man feels. However, trying to find sympathy for what happened in Ottawa and this man willingly aiding and abetting that is extremely hard. It's not impossible, but it's extremely hard. And so here he is, now homeless with no money saved up, and he's not getting support because, a lot of the funds were frozen. He is one of the people whose bank account has been frozen, so he can't even help or receive stuff even if he wanted to. Because, again, he aided and abetted terrible, shitty behavior in Ottawa that terrorized thousands of people in the downtown core. And he did all of that because he was tired and frustrated, and he was living alone. And so 2 years of basic isolation, that obviously changes people, and not for the better. It puts a lot of pressure and stress and strain on them. And so finally, when he hears about the convoy that is going, he feels like he can finally be part of something bigger. And even in like the videos and interviews that he's done, provide some links in the description down below, but he's clearly experiencing a lot of those problems. And then when he finally sees that there's a convoy and hopefully it's going to unite people, and it's something bigger than himself, right? And yet here he is at the end of all things with nothing positive to show for it. And there are lots of other people online who, it's kind of like we told you so, but there's still an ounce of sympathy and regret for these people who have been led around by the nose by the likes of terrible, awful, rat-faced villains like Tamara Lich and Pat King. A lot of these folks were duped into believing that the convoy leaders were there for them and would bail them out, that their actions would have no consequences. And that is sad, but it's no excuse for the terror they inflicted on us. And yeah, that's something I guess we should touch on a little bit more, right? Is this is sad, but also when you listen to the guy when he's giving interviews and doing recorded videos, messages and stuff, he regrets going, but that's after everything that happened. If, big if, right? And it's a hypothetical. If, oh, look, the funds hadn't been seized and he had gotten some financial recompense and stuff like that, would he be feeling the same way, considering what pulled him to the convoy in the first place? Loneliness, anger at not being able to see a dying friend in hospital, wanting to be part of something bigger than himself. And that's the insidious fucking problem with all of this stuff and general bullshittery from the far right or any kind of reactionary, is when people are pushed and stressed to this extreme point. They are ripe for radicalization, and not the good kind of I want to take care of my community and ensure that everyone has a home and food, good healthy food, and no one has to worry about their base needs. No, not that kind of radicalization. More now I need to find justification for why I need to overthrow the government kind of radicalization, right? And that's a problem. This is a sad story. How many people burnt out from COVID restrictions were vulnerable to the Freedom Convoy grift? Big money and organizers must be held accountable. And I know some of them are being held accountable, but how many other actual businesses that we talked about, see previous video entries in this whole unfortunate playlist about the Freedom Convoy? How many other businesses like the Petit Bourgeoisie, how many of these jackasses are going to get off scot-free, right? We don't know. It's still in the early phases. These are just the tentative updates. What, a month after this happened? Not exactly, seeing a whole bunch of stuff going. We get some, main points from a handful of people in stories, this one included. But again, right, people, it's not that people are without sympathy, but it's kind of like, we tried to warn you and you didn't listen. I told you so can only go so far. I mean, I feel like this is the exact thing we were trying to warn them about. In fact, some of the Zello mods got very angry at me for saying that this was going to happen. But arguably, one of the best responses that I've seen to this man and his plight has been the following from an actual anti-fascist in Ottawa. I've been accused of not showing enough empathy towards the occupiers. Make no mistake, I have mountains of empathy for the marks who were taken advantage of by this movement. I watched this guy's leaving Ottawa video and it is painfully sad. The convoy activated the very real frustrations, loneliness, and isolation of many people who were later chewed up and spit out after the convoy grifters had milked them of their goodwill, and in this case, their life savings. The root cause of this frustration, loneliness, and isolation, which makes people vulnerable to abuse by the far right, is the destruction of community under neoliberalism, accelerated by 2 years of pandemic. The way out of this in the short term isn't through electoralism and the exercise of state power. We simply do not have the movement to make meaningful use of the power of the state even if we were to claim it. Look at the NDP whenever it has taken power. I've oriented my thinking around the concept of dual power, as articulated by the DSA Libertarian Socialist Caucus. There's a powerful quote from their statement on dual power that continues to resonate for me. We believe our current projects and pursuits must mirror, and in mirroring become, the world we want to emerge from the ashes of capitalism. In short, our method consists of embodying the world we dare to dream. What is my point? Electing left-leaning liberals is not going to bring about the radical change we need to our social and economic order for addressing the root causes of fascism, let alone climate change, ecological collapse, housing crisis, mass incarceration, etc. We need to instead build community and build up communal power that can make up for the lapses of our current regime. The solidarity that comes from undertaking this work together is the strongest thing we have. The far right has recognized the power of common purpose and is using it to take advantage of people like the guy in the article at the top. What we can offer is an alternative that doesn't exploit people, but rather lifts each of us up to achieve our full potential as social beings. We in Ottawa are still in the post-convoy haze. Momentum for action has ground to a crawl, but we should recognize that this is part of the cycle of movement building. It will be important to take advantage of this lull in order to reassess our strategic footing, but also to solidify our newfound sense of community and solidarity. This is how we strengthen our movement for the next time that the far right mobilizes. It's also how we draw in allies from the disaffected middle. I hope others recognize this too and take advantage of this moment. And again, right, like personally, it's really hard to find sympathy for people like this guy. But it is, I want to say sadly, but even then that feels kind of weird to say. But it is not impossible for me to find sympathy with these people, as you saw from even some of the other tweets that I showed, where it's like, yeah, like this is unfortunate. They were led by the worst people. So then how do we fix that, right? How do we prevent that in the future? And I know I've talked about this before in like, maybe it's a related video in this whole Freedom Convoy thing, or it's in that video from way back when I was talking about a book about hatred and how people can be radicalized because of the pressures that they are facing in their community and what they see as a lack of action towards addressing these problems, at least in the short and immediate term. And unfortunately, the Freedom Convoy exploited this for thousands upon thousands of Canadians and elsewhere around the world, because people are tired and frustrated of the COVID restrictions and the lockdowns and not being able to see friends and family. And, you know, I get it, right? Because I'm right there with you. I too am tired of this. But unfortunately, our governments, at the behest of big business, didn't do the right things from the get-go, and they continue steadfastly to refuse to do the right thing, which is why we continue to be mired in this frustrating and excessively long pandemic response. But the answer is not fascism and trying to overthrow the government and become a national security threat and terrorize your fellow Canadians while having the audacity to say that you're here for all Canadians and fighting for freedom and for the freedom of the people you are terrorizing, while ignoring all evidence that says that this is a bad thing with a bad idea and a bad outcome, all because you so desperately wanted to feel like a normal human being again. And I get it. I absolutely get it, because in those rare moments over the course of this pandemic, when I have been able to see friends and family and go out somewhere or have a small gathering with, whether it's like out at a picnic or something, or, oh yeah, everyone who's vaccinated, we take like rapid tests before going, and finally, look, we're having like a Christmas together. I can't believe we missed the Christmas last year, but oh, this feels so good. Like stuff like that, right? It felt so good. And thankfully, everything seems to have worked out so far. But the unfortunate reality is that I can only get back to, that more of the time and not have to worry about the pandemic when we actually do what needs to be done. And when we actually, take the advice of experts, and when we continue to vaccinate more of the rest of the world and keep a handle on spread by doing the actual things that need to happen. Which, if we don't want another lockdown, means more people need to get vaccinated. We should keep mask mandates, and we shouldn't be opening up more and more travel as more variants continue to spread. There should be a global push to actually get like a global handle on this rather than a piecemeal regional approach, because that's just how more variants are going to pop up and spread, because we refuse to do the right thing and refuse to limit travel when and where necessary. That is the grim and unfortunate reality. And unfortunately, that only means that something like this is going to happen again as more people continue to be frustrated and radicalized and see a lack of action from government and mixed messaging and inconsistent messaging or no messaging whatsoever. And so they begin to wonder, well, what's the point of everything? And that's why, unfortunately, already, as we've seen with worsening trends behind the scenes that you probably haven't heard about from the media, about the BA2 variant, and why this spring is probably going to be another unmitigated disaster. And so what happens after that, in the wake of seeing yet more nurses quit from, stress and exhaustion, and more people, including children, being sick and dying in the hospital, and more developments of long COVID and people realizing, oh God, this actually really sucks. What's going to happen after that? Based on what we've seen so far, nothing pretty. That is what concerns me, and that is what's bothering me today.